native plants and their key roles in the world we live in are passionate about their work because of how important it is. It is far from a trend. It's a much needed paradigm shift in how we garden and why we garden. This is why I wanted to do Natives 201. Because my first time around, I don't feel I dove deep enough into the why. And it is the why we plant native plants that is so important and makes all the difference. The reason I hear the most for why people are looking for native plants is because they are said to be low maintenance. This is technically true. They have lived here for thousands of years, so they are well adapted to our soils and climate, but this low maintenance perk often overshadows the many more important roles they play and why there is such a big movement for them. So let's dive in, shall we? Native plants directly support our local ecosystem as a vital food source for our local insect herbivores, birds, and wildlife. The majority of native plants serve as host plants for our native insect herbivores, most importantly butterflies and moths, which make up 50% of insect life in the United States. But caterpillars do not just eat any native. Each species adapted over thousands of years to particular flora. This is called specializing, and 90% of our insect herbivores are considered specialists. The most popular example of this is the relationship between monarchs and the milkweed, or Asclepias family. Monarch caterpillars only eat from this family, and their life cycle revolves around these plants. No milkweed, no monarchs. But there are thousands of similar relationships that occur within our local ecosystem, and some plants host more species of insect than others. The champion of all host plants are oaks, such as the white oak and northern red oak, among countless others, which serve as hosts for 432 species of butterflies and moths. The reason why butterflies and moths, which are all members of the group called Lepidoptera, are so important is because they are essential to birds' diets in the spring and early summer months. This is the time when birds are raising their young, and it is estimated baby birds eat 30 to 40 times a day. No caterpillars, no baby birds. In addition to the Lepidoptera family, there are many other insect herbivores in our ecosystem that rely on native plants to survive as well. Katydids, grasshoppers, the many different types of beetles, sawflies, and 4,000 different species of native bees. Oh, and spiders. In addition to tasty caterpillar snacks, native plants produce berries and nuts for birds, squirrels, deer, raccoons, and other local wildlife species too. The majority of berries and nuts are available for consumption in the late summer, fall, and winter months. This nourishment is essential for migrating birds who need to fuel their journey, as well as our overwintering birds who need winter meals. Another important role native plants play in our ecosystem is providing shelter and habitat for our birds and local wildlife. I did a webinar in November called For the Birds. I discussed the importance of a layered landscape that creates the ideal habitat for our local birds. Canopy layer, understory layer, shrub layer, and ground cover layer, which is basically how our woodland forests were structured before we replaced much of the lower layers with lawn and concrete. The more we contribute to building back our lower layers of the woodland forest, the more we encourage our feathered friends to stick around and feel at home. Perennial and ground cover natives are also essential shelter and habitat for many insect herbivores. And in case you are wondering why I keep saying insect herbivores, it is a way to lump all of those little creatures into one. Natives also build our soils with their leaf litter. And not only does this leaf litter contribute to healthy soil, but leaf litter is also habitat for many pupating caterpillars, spiders, and other insect herbivores. Natives provide sources of pollen and nectar for butterflies, bees, moths, and other insect herbivores. There is much research still to be done on our native bee species, but one thing is becoming more apparent is how many have evolved with our local flora as well and rely on specific native sources of pollen. All of these reasons are essential to the value of native plants, but top of the list is definitely their unique role of supporting our local insect herbivores. These relationships are crucial to the health of our ecosystem. Now we are going to transition to non-natives and what exactly that means. Just as the conversation has been turned up on the importance of natives, so has the topic of non-native and invasive species. A non-native is just that, a plant that has been introduced to our area, but that shares no evolutionary history. These plants take up space, nutrients, and water, but they do very little to support our local ecosystem. And in the case of invasive species, they affect our ecosystem in a negative way. The Tennessee Invasive Plant Council has a website that has a list of established threats and emerging threats. In the established threat category, here are a few on their list: mimosa, Asian bittersweet, sweet autumn clematis or clematis, burning bush, winter creeper, English ivy, honeysuckle, privet, maidengrass, Bradford or Callery pear, vinca, Japanese spirea, and Chinese and Japanese wisteria. This is just a few, but there are much more on that list. And in the emerging threat category, akebia, butterfly bush, nandina, and golden bamboo. The invasive species spread throughout our land for several reasons. What the majority of these plants have in common is that they grow fast. There are some native plants that grow fast too, but because they are team players in our ecosystem, their fast growth, in the majority of cases, is seen as a positive more than a negative. For invasives, this means they are quickly crowding out our native species. Our ecosystem has checks and balances, but the non-native species did not evolve here, and they skate by these checks and balances because our insect life, native pathogens, and parasites do not recognize them and by and large leave them alone. They also spread quickly because birds eat their fruit and disperse them to new locations. And you might say to yourself, well, they're at least feeding the birds, right? New studies are showing that even that small benefit is not as positive as we might think. A recent study was done by a woman named Susan Smith at the Rochester Institute of Science. She and her team discovered something very interesting when they studied the differences between non-native and native fall fruit-producing plants. In her research, she found that non-native species berries contained less than 1% of fat, in contrast to the natives, which contained close to 50% weight on average. Fall berries are critical for birds in the fall, and their need for fat reserves is essential. Along with the many other negatives associated with non-natives, this is another reason why planting natives is more beneficial. Not only have we introduced these exotics that are wreaking havoc on our unmonitored woodlands and properties, but we have also introduced foreign pests and diseases as well. Some of the introduced pests include, but I promise there are many more I won't mention. Hemlock woolly adelgid. This pest was introduced in 1927 in the Pacific Northwest and originates from Asia. It finally made its way across the United States on transported nursery stock and has turned into a tragic crisis. Basically, these little tiny creatures suck the life out of our hemlocks, and mortality usually occurs within 4 to 10 years. There is actually a hemlock hospice in Massachusetts at a Harvard research property where they are studying their deaths closely. This adelgid is also affecting thousands of hemlocks in our Tennessee forests. A few weeks ago, my wife and I went to the Southern Cumberland State Park region, which is the hat I'm wearing, because I want to promote it. It's a beautiful place. We explored the waterfalls and parks in that area. Savage Gulf State Natural Area is home to some of the oldest hemlocks that exist in eastern forests. We encountered a group of professors and researchers with clipboards in hand at the start of the trail. They were so excited to speak with us and know what had brought us to the park that day. I was honestly starstruck, and all I could get out of my mouth was how much I was looking forward to seeing the hemlocks. Those studious warriors are my heroes, and I hope to be just like them when I grow up. Ambrosia beetle. This is a beetle that was introduced in the 1970s. They bore into thin-barked wood, introduce ambrosia fungus, and lay eggs. The young feed on the growing fungus. Death occurs to the tree either from the boring, the ambrosia fungus, or this activity making the tree susceptible to other pathogens waiting to find an injured host. Native trees susceptible to this introduced pest are dogwood and redbud. Emerald ash borer. This pest affects all species of ash as well as our native white fringe tree. They are closely related and are both very susceptible. There is no cure for this pest aside from gallons of harmful systemic chemicals, and the current advice for treatment right now is to cut the tree down. Super disheartening. Also, have you ever wondered about the weird restraints around firewood? These types of pests are why this is a thing and why campsites and national parks are so adamant about campers only purchasing certified firewood. That's how they can spread, and why even the little things like buying the right firewood can make a huge difference.
Hey, Joy.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions right now.
Okay.
Really quickly. Maybe something to keep in mind for when you're in a position to cover this more. The first one is suggestions for a small yard in town,
Okay.
native species. The next one is, are there any evergreen natives that are edible? I'm working on a permaculture food forest and hoping to find something for my chickens to hide under in the winter.
That are edible. To humans or to the chickens?
That's a good question. We'll give the commenter a second to follow that up.
Okay. I mean, I think the Ilex glabra are, I think that's one that you can like use as a tea.
Is that like
So-
a holly?
Yeah. Yeah, it's our native holly.
She said humans.
Yeah. That would be the only thing I could think of. I mean, I don't think we can, I don't know. I have to do some more research on that. But that's a good question.
Now, this is only from what I've heard, but some species of pine, you can use the needles to make a tea, but I don't think they're all created equal. I would do your due diligence there before
Yeah.
you venture into that.
Another one to look into would be our eastern red cedar. That could be a good option too.
Yes, and it's it's very vigorous here. Okay.
Like, we're good?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. The last pest is imported fire ants. These imports displace our native ant populations, have the potential to girdle young trees' root systems, and are a threat to young and newborn animals. And if one has ever stepped foot in one in their mounds unintentionally with sandals on in Texas, not knowing these terrible creatures existed, they will never forget that said experience. That was my experience. They're terrible. And they're also making their way up. It was more of a southern issue, but now like we are definitely seeing fire ants in this region. The last time I looked, the quarantine zone was the Cumberland River, but that could have changed by now. We have also introduced many foreign diseases that are affecting our native plant life as well. Chestnut blight is one that will honestly make you cry reading about. In the late 1800s, this blight was introduced to North America from Japanese chestnut trees that had been brought over. It took 50 years, but the result was that what was once the dominant upland forest had been functionally eliminated from eastern forests. Chestnuts were a vital part of our forest ecosystems and supported hundreds of insect herbivores and fed wildlife. The good news on this front, however, is there are folks who have been working on a disease-resistant American chestnut, and their arrival into the market is not far away. The next disease we'll talk about is sudden oak disease. This is a newer disease and has scientists quite worried. It has killed tens of thousands of California oaks. Researchers, scientists, and agriculture departments are doing all that they can to make sure that this disease is kept at bay and does as little damage as possible. Dogwood anthracnose. This is a disease that was introduced to the U.S. in the 70s as well. It is a fungus that can be deadly to our native dogwoods, trees that play a very active role in our woodland ecosystems, and their loss is our loss. I will add that the Cherokee series, as well as Appalachian snow, are resistant to the disease and are recommended for your home landscape. The last disease we will discuss is Dutch elm disease. Introduced in the 1930s, this disease took a large portion of our elm population, especially in the Northeast. Thanks to hard work and research, there are now disease-resistant trees in the market, including Princeton and Valley Forge. It's a lot to soak in, but we have done a number on our national ecosystem over the past 100 years plus. And I haven't even addressed how much rapid development of our lands has degraded habitat and reduced plant communities. I have thought intensely about how to approach the topic of what we have done wrong. No one wants or needs a guilt trip. What is done, and we cannot change what has already happened. We have unleashed invasive plants, exotic pests, and detrimental diseases into our landscapes and natural areas. There is no denying that. But we can learn from these mistakes and do our best to do better now and in the future. Perhaps we should tackle this question of what we have done wrong like this. Imagine your property as a healthy diet. It's a goofy analogy, but let's roll with it. A little sugar won't hurt us, but if it is all we consume, our body suffers. Non-natives are the Oreos, the cupcakes, the soda, and natives are the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains, and the water. What we plant in our yards is literally the diet for the ecosystem that surrounds us. If all we are offering them is sugar, which the majority cannot consume anyway, our insects, birds, and other wildlife suffer. It's a little more motivating if we see planting natives as contributing to a healthier diet for our fellow inhabitants. A little Japanese maple sugar is okay, but make sure you are adding nutritious goldenrod, serviceberry, and oak intake too. For far too long, we have introduced way too much high fructose corn syrup into the bloodstream of our ecosystem, and now it is time to give our properties a healthier diet of what it needs to sustain life. And as I have experienced personally with changing to a healthier diet, the more I feel the benefits of eating healthy, the less I crave sugar and the more I reach for a more nutritious option instead. Whether your property is 5 acres or a quarter of an acre, we have a responsibility to be good earth stewards of our land. 86% of America's land is privately owned. It is the private landowner that will determine the fate of our future ecosystem's health and vitality. There are some services both non-natives and natives perform by simply being present. These benefits include helping to fight erosion by keeping soil in place with their root systems. They store carbon in their bodies and in the soil around their roots, and they filter runoff water, making our watersheds cleaner. But where natives take the lead in a tremendous way is what they offer in way of ecosystem services. And this is the message I want to drive home. No milkweed, no monarchs, no caterpillars, no baby birds, no native pollen, no native bees. This is a message from much smarter individuals than me, and they are doing their best to communicate just how much this matters. Not only for these species, but for us too. No insect herbivores in our world would screech to a halt. I am just here with you today to relay this public service announcement and be an advocate for change. So for the love of all that is good and holy, plant more natives. On Tuesday, February 16th, I will be doing another webinar titled Planting for Biodiversity. I left a lot of things out of this one because I wanted to save some good information for that one too. I will go further into the details of how you contribute to your yard's healthy diet, and I will discuss host plants and insect herbivores more in depth and steps we can all take to make our properties more supportive for the creatures around us that desperately need our help and cooperation. And I will end with this. I coined a phrase on my last webinar that really stuck with me, and I wanted it to stick with you too. A landscape that caters to the whole is the end goal. All right. I think that was a little shorter than I was thinking it would go, but I love questions and I'd like to have more of a dialogue.
Still well put. Well, you mentioned towards the end there, you mentioned erosion control and contributing to the soil. What do you think right off the rip we could get into our yards or encourage if there's something growing nearby to help towards that?
To help towards runoff and erosion?
And also I guess that also contributes, like erosion meaning like holding more water in the soil too.
Yeah, because it stops all that from going. More plants. That really, like when I listen to people talk about this, it's just planting more, because the more plants there are, the more they soak up. Because the biggest issue is our concrete and our lawn. What used to be that woodland forest is now gone, and there's so much more pathway for runoff and erosion. Because we've taken a lot of the plants away. So more plants.
So which ones here though? I mean, like
that
we could plant.
A really good one that we recommend for erosion is Itea, which is actually behind me. It's this one.
Is that Sweet Spire?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes. And what makes that good is because it suckers, it colonizes, and so it takes, and aronia or chokeberry would be another good option too, because they sucker, their root systems are really like keep spreading out and keep that soil in place.
And also, I mean, Itea has lovely color in the fall seasons. I love it.
Yeah, there's a lot of perks. It blooms in the spring. It's a host plant for a couple things, and it's good for pollinators as well.
Now, could you plant those on slopes too?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, which is where a lot of erosion is such a big issue.
Yes, I know. There's a lot of people that come here asking for, like, what do I do? I'm on, my driveway, even like planting on next to your driveway to prevent that runoff from washing it out.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, I was watching the path of runoff in my own yard this morning. Like, that's a new direction.
The water wills. Mm-hmm. Okay, so addressing addressing Sarah's question about a small yard in town. What kind of natives would work?
Well, it depends on if you've got sun or shade. You could kind of take the prairie approach if you've got a lot of sun. That would be grasses and a lot of perennials like aster, goldenrod, ironweed are all really great. There's a ton of options. If you're wanting to introduce a tree into this small space, and it's not a all-day full sun spot, I would definitely go with a serviceberry or one of my favorites, which is right here, is a Washington hawthorn. That's only going to get about 20-25 feet, so it's a moderate-sized tree that feeds the birds, and it's a host plant as well. Hawthorns host quite a few insect species.
Wonderful. And we got another question from Angela here. Are tick seed, Coreopsis, Echinacea, and Tithonia considered natives? I had such a diverse number of insects on these.
Coneflower was one.
Yeah, coneflower. Tithonia, I believe, is Mexican sunflower.
Yeah, that's not native.
Okay.
But most tick seeds are, and there's several different species within the genus of Coreopsis or tick seed, and some are more regional than others. The one that is the most regional is the verticillata, which is the one with the really thin leaves. That is definitely a native. Coneflower, yes. Purpurea, Echinacea purpurea, you will see growing in our area.
Yeah, Tennessee's even in the name of one of them.
Well,
right?
That's Tennessee coneflower, and that's another one that is specific to the cedar glades. That's in Tennessee. It doesn't grow anywhere else. I mean, it's been introduced to other places, but it originated in the cedar glades.
Let's see. Barbara's asking, what's a good strategy for an established yard that includes the usual non-native plants to move it to more native? Yeah,
Sure.
How do you transition?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is, you don't have to go and tear out all your non-natives. Maybe tear out the invasives. That's a start. But this is just a journey for all of us. And I have several non-natives in my yard too. And I've had to really think long and hard about how I want to approach this from here on out. And so everything I plant now is native. And so when something dies, I replace it with a native. Or I made another bed. I extended a bed, and everything that went in that bed was native. So it's just a process. Like I said, it's not a guilt trip. It's just we just have to start transitioning into planting more natives.
So we're talking about a kind of mid to long-term strategy, right? And we want to envision replacing those spaces with something that's going to be more friendly to our wildlife.
Yeah. And what I'll talk on in the planning for biodiversity, so make sure you catch that too, because I'll go more in depth, is there are certain native plant species that support a larger amount of insect herbivores than others. They're called keystone plants. And so starting with those that are going to, like goldenrod is fantastic. And it's, a lot of people look down on it, but it supports, I think, 118 insect herbivores. Native bees will use it as they'll overwinter in the stems. It's just a great plant. So plants like those that support a lot of aspects, support the whole, are the ones you want to start with. Not that the natives that don't support as much are bad, but starting with the like heavy hitters is the way to go.
Yeah, I've been reading that we've got some questions here about like decent lawn alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've heard that Bermuda is not native to the South.
Right.
It was introduced as like a grazing grass for cattle, right? So, and that grass is relentless. I mean, it's everywhere
It's
in
pain.
some respects. Yes. And it's really hard to get rid of.
Yeah. So lawn alternatives.
Yeah, definitely lawn alternatives. And then also, before that, I don't want to skip over Devin's question. Are there any flowers that would be most effective for pollinators? South facing near, he says, quote unquote, cypress. He's not native. So those, in fact, might be eastern red cedar. But yeah, south facing pollinator flowers.
Hot. So prairie approach. Things that like all day sun. Because south facing is a hot spot. Like I said, goldenrod, coneflower, ironweed, aster. The asters are great team players in supporting a lot of insect herbivores. And they also offer that late cycle of pollen when a lot of other things are starting to go dormant or are being affected by the seasons. Other things. There's more.
Definitely, there's more.
The Rudbeckia family is also a really great, and it's a long season bloomer. And there's lots of different kinds. There's one that will get 6 feet tall, and then there's the typical Goldstrom that's only 18, 24 inches. Well, 24 inches, give or take.
I planted the Maxima variety this year. I'm excited to see how big it gets.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Let's see here. Let me go back. We're getting a lot of questions. Yeah, so the question about lawn alternatives, somebody said they thought about planting buffalo grass and violets.
Violets. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Violets are great. They are native. They support, there's a fritillary that is on the brink of extinction because right when they are breaking and crawling around, we're starting to mow our lawns. And you can kind of follow how that leads to their untimely death. So yeah, violets, also sedges. We have a lot of native sedges that people are using now. And I would use those over buffalo grass. My favorite is one called Carex flaccosperma, which is more for shade. It can take some sun. And most of the sedges are going to be more shade loving, the ones that are native. There's a Pennsylvania sedge that's really popular that a lot of people are using, and several others. So I would go that route, but keep your violets.
And also a question about the native flowers. Do they tend to be more drought and disease resistant if they're native?
Yes, as long as it's not a disease that we've introduced. And mildew can be an issue because it's just so hot and humid here that some of our plants, native or not, get mildew.
You're talking like powdery mildew?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's...
Yeah, it gets on my Monarda every year.
Those wet nights that we have after the rains and doesn't really evaporate.
Yeah. I mean, the most basic, recommendation for when to water is always in the morning because you want all that water to, dry up and evaporate before it becomes nightfall, or else that's when, disease and mildew happen. But you can't help it when it rains at night. So it's just a part of it. It's nothing to really fret over.
Mm-hmm. Angela is also saying that she grew clover as her grass last year. It's a boon is keeping the deer and groundhogs and rabbits out of the vegetable garden. But it dies off when the heat of summer really hits. I too have used clover as a cover crop. I did that last year. It was great. Huge bee food in the spring. I couldn't believe that I could hear the sounds of bees swarming on it. And we're talking about, I think I planted probably 50 square feet of it.
Uh-huh.
But it was incredible.
Nice.
Let's see. Sarah said, I'm not a fan of Bermuda, the creeping Charlie taking over the yard. I planted clover for the chickens.
Oh.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. Wish I had chickens.
Me too. Devin said, I've heard thyme, woolly or otherwise, can work. Don't know if thyme is native here. Do we have a native thyme?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I'm not going to I like to add thyme to my steak. It's okay. You can use that in small. It's not invasive. But it's,
yeah.
But if you're don't use it for a lawn.
Yeah. Pennsylvania sedge.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah's asking, what was the other one mentioned? That's what she has, sorry.
Carex flacosperma, or
Okay.
it's blue wood sedge is the common name.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Carex is at CRR.
Carex. It's also a brand of soap, I think.
Carex. Kim asks, what type of grass do you recommend in Nashville?
Less
of
of it.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky question because really, yeah.
I ultimately am promoting less grass, and will more so in the next webinar that I do. But it just depends. Fescue, that's the least aggressive, and that's what a lot of people use here. But in all day full sun, it's gonna not love it. It's gonna need irrigation in the summertime.
Yeah. So you would recommend more of what, like a woodland approach, like kind of encouraging trees with maybe some small shrubs, understory?
Yeah. And creatively using your lawn to like as more of a path. Because I have some yards it's not feasible to just, all at once get rid of all your grass because it's a nightmare. So little by little is kind of the approach. But yeah, with having a little bit of lawn just to kind of define lines, and I don't know if that was helpful.
I think it was.
Okay.
I mean, I enjoy in the afternoons, like walking on cool grass. I think that so it makes sense to me, especially grass that takes traffic well, that it be used more in that function. Also, less mowing is a boon overall too.
Yeah. Yeah, and a nice thing about fescue is the requirements of the cutting height is higher anyway, 3 or 4 inches. So you're able to kind of save some of those little creatures you can't see in your lawn by cutting at a higher level.
And possibly helping hold more water, you think?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. Okay. We're waiting for any other questions, but it looks like the questions have kind of died down. So if we don't get any, we'll probably start wrapping up here in a moment.
Okay.
Any other... We at Bates Nursery carry a lot of not only plants that are native. I mean, we have some invasives too, admittedly, but we also carry soils as well. Do you recommend as like a soil that would be good to add to your yard or your garden that could kind of like increase maybe holding moisture? Or
I really like mushroom compost. That's probably my outspoken favorite, just because I don't know, I like it. I like it. It seems to perform well. But I mean, we have a lot of products here that kind of serve similar functions as far as aerate, like adding to aerate the soil. If it's a heavy compacted soil that has been like, you're trying to change it to more of a garden setting where it's endured, I don't know, foot traffic and car parking and that kind of thing.
Compaction is super important because a lot of new home construction is literally just compact, and construction waste is compacted in that too. Backfill.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the theory of, our native plants are used to this native soil, so why should you use amendments? Well, new construction ruins that because you're stuck with the sublayer and they take all your topsoil off. So it's that process of building it back to more healthy soil.
Yes. I've even heard that topsoil is scraped and sold.
Yeah.
Like they scrape it and sell it off, and then the sub layer is just what you're left with.
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right, we've got some questions coming in now. Devin says, do I need to worry about acidification of soil underneath an eastern red cedar if I'm going to be planting there?
They do like it a little more alkaline. They're pretty tough though. I mean, as long as your soil's not crazy acidic, it's not. I wouldn't worry about it because you see those things growing in the side of like rocks, the eastern red cedar, so they're pretty resilient.
Yeah, I do think that there's a relationship between them and the limestone that's that's native to the area. A really cool place to see Tennessee's natives in action is the Cedars of Lebanon
Yes.
State Park. It's incredible. There are these limestone beds, really cool lichen, mushrooms, but then there's these cedar glades that are just so beautiful.
Yeah.
Really gives you a good picture of what things used to look like in the basin.
It's a great place to go camping too.
Yes. Let's see. Sarah says, was inkberry the evergreen you mentioned for tea?
Yes, I was totally spacing on a common name.
Okay, cool.
Thank you for, yes.
Yeah.
Inkberry.
Cool. Okay. Teresa says, how do you recommend getting rid of invasives like Johnson grass?
Well, that's hard. Yeah, because lots of cardboard is the most eco-friendly way to do it without breaking out your glyphosate and spraying it a million times to kill it, or digging it up. So I try the cardboard first, just like a really heavy layer, and then maybe even mulch over top of it and just let it sit there for a while. Which, of course, in that mulch, you'll also get new baby seedlings of other things, but at least it's not Johnson grass.
Yeah. And possibly really water that cardboard down too, so it's
Yeah.
nice and waterlogged and will smother really well.
Yeah. Or plant a tree that will shade it out.
Teresa said, "Wow, that's just what I do for Johnson grass cardboard." There you go. You're right on the money. Angela asks, "Can you list off maybe 3 to 5 non-natives that make you cringe when you see them in a yard and why?"
Sorry, I missed that question.
Yeah, we had a visitor.
Visitor.
Can you list off maybe 3 to 5 non-natives that make you cringe when you see them in a yard and why?
Yes. Vinca. I cringe at that because when I go hiking in the parks around Nashville, I see Vinca a lot, and I'm just so bothered by it. Kind of bothered by Nandina because I see that popping up in the woods everywhere. Burning bush. That one.
Oh yeah, you've got a thing about
I
burning
do have a
bush.
thing about burning bush.
How about what is it called? Oh, it's like a pea that's got a purple flower on it that was planted for erosion control. What was
Vetch.
that? Yes, vetch. Is vetch semi-native at all?
We have a native vetch,
Okay.
but there was an introduced vetch too.
Bro.
And I wouldn't be able to, I haven't gone into depth about, but I know that there's two. I know we do have a native vetch.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Okay. We got a Facebook question. What natives are fast growers when planted by seed? When do you typically plant native seeds in Tennessee?
You know, I haven't done a lot of research on seeds, and I've been listening to a couple podcasts, and there's some seed growers up in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and they've been talking a lot about it, so I've been trying to soak it all up. Because my experience is more with cuttings and plugs. So I can't speak a whole lot on that. Spring usually, because that's when things are starting to germinate, and so that's when you want those seeds to germinate. What was the first part of the question? How tall? I retain nothing.
No, it's okay. I'm going back. Fast growers.
Oh, fast growers. Yeah. I mean, just doing kind of a prairie mix. You won't see much the first year because the first year they're always getting established. You won't get a whole lot of blooms, but the next year is when it really explodes if you're doing things by seed.
Is it true that some of our natives are like, is it biennial, where they will kind of like produce for one season, then dormant?
The second year is when they flower, produce seeds, and then that's the end of their life.
Oh,
Those seeds are the ones that then keep the
okay.
process going.
Awesome. Let's see here. Is Johnson grass the same as nut grass? Just
Nutsedge?
yeah.
No, they're two different.
Okay.
Terrible
Susan asked
things.
that question. She was just catching up. And nutsedge is not native?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so,
Okay.
but it might be.
What are your thoughts on liriope, monkey grass?
I'm not opinionated at all.
No.
It's a necessary evil, I guess. But there are two types of liriope. Spicata, which is rarely, you don't find that in the nursery setting anymore because that's the one that's just crazy invasive. And then there's the big blue. The Mascari is the one that's supposed to be more clumping. But I would hands down pick to choose planting sedge, carex, any day over monkey grass. I heavily promote it.
All right, let's see here. I think. Oh, Angela asked, "What are your favorite podcasts for expanding knowledge on natives?"
Ah, okay. Healthy plants. Oh, I turned my phone off. It's from Pinelands Nursery. That's one I've been listening to a lot. They bring on a lot of people, including Doug Tallamy spoke about, he's it was more about this Nature's Best Hope book that he just came out with in 2019. That's really good. There's also a native plant podcast that's out of Virginia. And the first episode I listened to had Mike Berkeley from Grow Wild as one of the hosts on that episode. And they're just really interesting conversations that happen on those. Those are my two favorites.
Yeah, one of our webinar viewers actually said she got some inkberry from Grow Wild.
Yeah, they grow that.
Cool. That about it for your list of
That's it.
recommended. And what were the books again?
Oh,
Just
books.
to go back over
So,
that.
Doug Tallamy, Bringing Nature Home, and Nature's Best Hope are the two books that I have read of his. There's another book by Claudia West I haven't read yet, but that's top on my list. Claudia West and someone else. But she's a designer, and so she kind of approaches natives as like how the landscape can be beautiful still, even because a lot of people, when they say, "Ugh, natives, they're ugly," they're not. They're beautiful. And the more we value their beauty, the more we understand just how important they are.
That's beautifully said. Next to you, I know you've listed your Itea and Hawthorne. What are the other folks that you have next?
Well, we've got Northern Red Oak, which is just a stick right now, but that's, like we discussed earlier, is a great host plant for lots of insect herbivores. Winterberry holly, not birds' favorite berry, but sometimes that's good. They eat their favorite berries first, and so they're kind of left with, like the kale of options, and that would probably be the winterberry. But still vital, because when they're really hungry, they'll eat it. Yeah, in Itea. And behind me that you can't see, I think I might actually buy this today. So. It's our native witch hazel.
Oh, cool. Is that the same one that people also make like medicinal stuff with? Or is...
I don't know what species they use for that.
Okay. Well, we do have a webinar coming up on medicinal plants that Caroline Gant's going to be teaching.
Maybe she will speak on that.
We can glean a little info.
I used that as a kid. My mom would make me wash my face with it.
Really? Mm-hmm. Did it work for you?
I don't know.
You're alive, right?
Didn't kill me.
Well, I'm just going to take, since we're kind of out of questions here, I'm just going to take this last little bit to wrap up. This has been Bates Botanical Boot Camp. Tomorrow's the 27th, right? Yep. We have Shrubs for Small Spaces. Ben Tress is going to be teaching that one. January 29th, Indoor Fern Care with Caroline and Vanessa. That's a good one to catch because ferns can be somewhat temperamental to grow indoors. We also are packed going into February with a lot of webinars as we start warming up. How to create springtime container gardens, February 24th. Roses 101, February 17th. Joy's Talk, Planting for Biodiversity on the 16th. And this is just a fraction of what we have on our website, batesnursery.com. Yes, Teresa, you get a list of classes by heading to batesnursery.com, scrolling down to the Bates Botanical Bootcamp slide, and you'll see a button there that says reserve your spot. If you click on that, that is our entire, I'm going to go ahead and paste the link in here too. That is our entire calendar of our classes that are coming up. We've got them all the way through the end of March. Then our busy season kind of ramps up then. So we'll probably pull back a little bit, but don't hesitate to also send us an email, info@batesnursery.com. If you have a specific question, send us pictures. We like lots of photos. We'll try and help you in any way we can. We appreciate you for attending.
Yes. Thank you. Plant more natives. I'm glad you guys tuned in today.